There are two main parts to landing a job in the UK. The first part is preparing your CV and your cover letter, looking for relevant openings, looking for recruiters, stalking them on Instagram and LinkedIn. Well, maybe not stalking, but all the way until you get shortlisted for an interview. The second part, which is just as crucial as the first part, is the actual interview by itself. Most people think that the first part, which is actually looking for a job, is more important than the actual interview. So they spend a disproportionate amount of time looking for the jobs instead of also focusing on their interview skills. And after spending all of those days and months prepping for the role and actually landing that interview, they finally get to the day of the interview and mess up. Something that could have been easily avoided. So are you going to be the person who finally gets to the interview and messes up his or her shot? Or are you going to be the person who actually nails that interview and moves to the UK? If you're the second type of person, I suggest you watch all the way till the end. Hi guys, I'm Ashika, and today we're talking about everything you need to know for interview preparation to make sure you land that job. Let's start off with the basics first. It's very likely that your call will be either via Skype or Zoom. So first off, please ensure that you find a location from where you can take the interview, which has not just great lighting and where you won't be disturbed, but also a place which has a good internet connection. And whatever the software is that is required for you to get on this call, ensure that you download it in advance, install it in advance, so that you aren't struggling at the last minute. If it's a face-to-face interview, ensure you get there in advance, at least 15 to 20 minutes in advance, because with London's transportation and the UK's transportation kind of messy right now, you never know what's going to be delayed, so don't wait for the last minute to get in there. The next thing, have your CV ready open on your laptop or your iPad, whatever is with you, or if it's a face-to-face interview, ensure that you have printed copies along with you. And remember to wear something really comfortable. It's good to look stylish, it's good to look very presentable, but not at the risk of you being extremely uncomfortable. So find that mix of something that is very presentable for an interview and also something that you're not uncomfortable in. Now, the way I see it, you have to prepare for your interview in two parts. The first part is the technical aspect. This is where you convince the recruiter or the interviewer that you have all the required skill sets that are required for you to do this job and do it well. Step one for you over here is to know your CV inside out. This is the part where you go over and practice every detail of your CV. Not only should you know what's on your CV, but you should also be able to give examples of your work if required. Now, if you've lied on your CV, which a lot of people do, this is where the interviewer is probably going to catch you, so I genuinely hope you haven't. A very common question in interviews is tell me about yourself, and that's usually what starts off the interview. So it is imperative for you to prepare for that answer in advance. What can you tell the recruiter to get them interested and excited about listening to you without oversharing? Now, you obviously don't want to start off with where you were born and what your name is. The recruiter already has all of these details. Ideally, structure it something like the present, past, future formula. What you currently do, what you've worked on in the past, and what you are looking for in terms of career goals. Now, I think it's a really good idea for you to write this down and practice your answer a bunch of times in advance, because the likelihood that you're going to be asked this question is really high. What you also need to understand is that the recruiter or the interviewer doesn't expect you to recite what's on your CV. They already know what's on your CV. They've most probably already gone through it at length before they decided to interview you. What they are looking for is a gist, and for you to tell them in your own words how hiring you is going to be beneficial to the organization and how you can help the organization grow. This is where you need to either intrigue them or wow them, basically open big. Use information about yourself, but also include information that you know they want to hear as a gift wrap of sorts, and then present it to them. Which brings me to my next point. The next point is understanding what the recruiter actually wants to hear. You might have done some really amazing things at your last job, good for you, but so what? How does this help the interviewer understand how your skill sets are going to help this new organization grow? I mean, a lot of people applying for this job probably have skill sets just as good as yours, if not better. Now, contrary to what you might believe, your interview is less about you and more about you telling the recruiter what you bring to the table that can help this organization grow. All your skills and experience are absolutely useless to this interviewer unless they can understand how they can use your experience and your skill sets to not just benefit the organization but also help them grow. So yes, the interview might be about you to a certain extent, but it's also about the interviewer understanding how and where you fit into the organization and what is the best way to use you. Which is where it is of utmost importance that you do your research, because your research is going to tell you how you can help the organization and how you can tell the recruiter that. Let me give you an example. As a digital marketing manager, I can say that I ran a campaign that had X% engagement rate and won an award. Or I can say, at my previous organization, I ran a campaign that hit X% engagement rate, and I noticed you run similar campaigns, and as per my rough calculations, it has like an X minus 5% engagement rate. I can help you bridge the gap. This shows relevance. You are now talking to the interviewer in a language he understands and wants to hear. You are showing how you bring value, which is extremely important. Now, you obviously don't have to do this for your entire CV, but a few points here and there for every job that you've worked on would be absolutely great. The National Career Service in the UK has a very interesting framework that you might find useful. It's called the STAR framework. What it stands for is situation, the situation you had to deal with; task, the task you were given to do; action, which is the action you took; and result. What happened as a result of your action, and what have you learned from the experience? Now, before I move ahead, remember to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already and click on the bell icon for notifications. Now, the next step, very, very, very important. Do your research on the job description. Now, if you get into an interview without doing this step, you may as well kiss your job goodbye. Well, unless you're Elon Musk, but you're not Elon Musk. Well, unless he's watching this video, because it's 2023 and anything can happen. You obviously read the job description when you applied for the job, but how much of it do you still remember? Think of a job description as a shopping list. The recruiter or the interviewer is gauging you against this shopping list to see how many of the boxes you check off, which means the answers that you give both as a part of your answers to questions that the recruiter, the interviewer asks you, and as a part of you describing yourself need to be in line with this job description. If you've already worked on things that are mentioned in the job description, that's absolutely brilliant. Please remember to bring it up in the conversation. Now, if you haven't done any work on some of the topics mentioned, it's all right. Do some research about it, mention some ideas you have around it, but the point is, make sure that you find a way to weave it into the conversation. Understand the goals of the organization and see if you can weave that naturally into the conversation, but not to the extent where it sounds like an absolute force fit. Understand the business. What does the business do? How do they generate revenue? What are its product lines? What does the company stand for? Bottom line, know everything you can about the company that you are applying for before you get into that interview. As a part of your research, the next thing you need to understand is the organizational structure of this organization that you're applying to. Do some research to see how this organization is structured. Who is the CEO? Who is your reporting manager going to be? Who does he report to? Does anyone report to you? Know all of these organizational lines or these structural hierarchies. Spend some time understanding the role that your manager is going to play, because at the end of the day, it will be your job to actually support them in whatever they do. The next step is to prepare for the questions that you are going to be asked. At some point during your interview, you will be given a scenario and your interviewer will ask you how you would react or what you would do in that scenario. What the interviewer is trying to gauge at this point is whether you can think on your feet and largely make the right decision, whether you get thrown off under pressure, and whether you actually have the kind of experience that you claim you have. Now, remember at this point that no one expects you to get something 100% accurate because you haven't actually worked on this scenario, but what they're trying to gauge is how you think on your feet and whether you get thrown off. What you actually need to do also at this point is Google the commonly asked questions for your role and prepare answers to all of them in advance. Another really common question that you should prepare for is, tell me about an instance where something you did was a failure, or tell me what your weaknesses are. Now, this is really tricky. You obviously don't want to admit that you accidentally burnt down a building, but you also don't want to try and reword your strengths as your weaknesses, which a lot of people do, which interviewers see through immediately. So honesty is a good thing here. If you are talking about a weakness or failure, also talk about how you are going to make sure that doesn't happen again, or what you're doing to work on it. So one of the weaknesses I have is that I normally take on too much initially, and then I work myself to the bone, and very soon, very obviously, I burn out, and that's not good for me or for the organization, right? Now, with experience, I have learned that this is a problem that I have. So what I have started to do is try and regulate the amount of work that I take on, set realistic expectations for deadlines in terms of when something can be delivered and when it can't, and not to overwork myself. Sometimes I succeed, sometimes I fail, but it's honestly okay to be honest about it. Now, you might be asked strength-based questions to understand where your strengths lie, or motivational questions to understand what motivates you, what gets you going. This is basically the interviewer trying to gauge where you fit in. Spend a lot of time practicing these answers. You might think you've nailed it down in your head, but all you need to get is one tough question on that day, which will completely throw you off balance, and then everything you start to say, you just fumble through. So it's really important that you practice in advance. If required, sit down with a friend and practice with a friend. Now, the next step involves preparing for the interview. Towards the end of the interview, you should have some questions to ask your interviewer, because you will be asked if you have any questions. At this point, I think it's really important for you to ask actual genuine questions versus asking questions which you think make you sound smart. The interviewer will see right through them. Instead, ask relevant questions. Here are some suggestions. Ask about the career progression you can expect from this role. Ask if the organization has been in the news about something and if that impacts the role you do. Ask about the work culture, especially if you have read a lot of negative comments about it on Glassdoor. Ask about what team you'll be working in. You could also ask what a typical day would be like in this role, what challenges you're expected to face. Basically, use this as an opportunity to not just prove that you are committed to this role and that you've done your research, but also to prove that you're very interested and you also want to know more about the role. Now, I had said earlier that there were two parts to this interview process for preparation. The first part was the technical aspect. Now, the second part is the cultural aspect. Now, for most parts, if you are interviewing for a job in your own country and if you have a cultural role, it's a cultural interview. It's not too much of a challenge because you already belong to that country. You know what is expected, what works, what doesn't. The point to remember here is that if you are watching this video, it's natural that you don't belong to the UK, you belong to a different country. And cultural differences here play a really big role. In all likelihood, you're going to be interviewing for a role in the UK by somebody from the UK, and the team that you're going to work with is either going to be part from the UK or all from the UK, or maybe from different parts in the world. It is important to show that you will fit in. It definitely helps at this point if you have played a role in the past that involved interacting with people from all over the world. That definitely shows that you don't have too much of a cultural challenge and you can fit in easily into a scenario. It also helps if you have some knowledge about the country that you're applying to. Now, apart from this, spend some time trying to understand what the culture of the organization is that you are applying to. Dress the part for the interview. You can find out very simply all of these things by just doing quick Googles, checking LinkedIn, checking Instagram. It's very easy to get all this information. The interviewer is trying to understand two things. One, if you align with the organizational goals and values, and two, if you will fit in well into the organization. Now, your communication skills also play a very important role here. No one expects you to speak with a British accent and sound like you're auditioning for the Crown, but they do expect you to be able to speak English well enough so that you can communicate with the rest of the team or with customers. Now, if English is not one of your strengths, I very highly recommend you spend some time strengthening your communication skills. Practice with your friends, with your families, whatever it takes for you to start speaking very naturally and getting very comfortable, because your interview will be in English. All the communication that you do at your organization will be in English, so get comfortable speaking it. Now, here's my opinion on visa sponsorship and asking for it and bringing it up in an interview. If at the start of the interview, when you applied for the job, if you were asked if you required sponsorship and if you said yes, well, that's great. I don't think you then need to bring it up in the early stages of interviews, because interviews usually have multiple rounds. If you have never been asked during the entire length of the entire process with this company if you need sponsorship, I think it is important for you to bring it up. Maybe not in your first call, but at least in the second or the third call. If you have filled it and you are in an interview, I would suggest you leave it off until later on so that they are able to form an opinion on you, gauge correctly whether they would like to hire you or not, and then take a decision. So you don't have to rush out and share this information unless you are specifically asked. But do remember to mention it at some point or the other during the entire interview process, because it is important for you to get sponsorship. And now you are ready to kill it at that interview. If you feel this video has helped you, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to know what you should absolutely take out of your CV right away to increase your chances of getting that interview, watch this.